This video is a really brief introduction to the client card screen, showing you what everything means. So I've clicked on the client Arsenal Limited. Wherever you see a client and it's in the blue kind of hyperlink style, you can click on that to come to the client card. Starting off down the left, when the page loads you'll be on the Summary tab. This contains a variety of fields in relation to this particular client. Some of those fields at the top are fixed. You're always going to see those. For example, the partner and manager linked to the client, the name, the type, the client code, incorporation date and next year end. Others are taken from from your own configuration. Of course, some fields will exist on the templates when they're created. For you to change the fields visible on the Summary tab, you'd want to go to Config. You'd need to be a super user to do that, and you want to click on Edit Additional Client Fields. We'll do a separate video focusing on how you do that. Coming down the left, the Tasks tab will show you any tasks that are linked to this particular client, and the links will show you any links between this client and any other clients and the type of link. We then get into the tabs that are dedicated to each of your workflow systems. Of course, you can configure your own workflow systems, and again that'll be the subject of a different video, but clearly here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 workflow systems that are potentially relevant to this type of client. Now, the green and red colouring is highly relevant. This indicates whether the system is active, which is green, or not active, which is red. This will have a default setting, so as soon as you create a client, it will be either green or red. In order to change that, you'd simply go in. So if I click on engagement letters, which is currently green, you'll see it's active. I can change that to not active, which will send that to red. Alternately, for example, VAT returns here, currently not active, I can go in and change that to active. Now, the numbers in the blue circles represent the number of active jobs currently within the system. A really important concept to understand in relation to the client card is, well, firstly the system active that we've looked at, but secondly it's considering what other info do you have to give to benefit from the automatic job creation. So for example, if you imagine that we had just started providing the VAT return service to Arsenal Limited, I've just switched the system to active a moment ago, what else do I have to do? Well, the answer is you have to provide the date of the very first job you wish to be tracked in Glide. I have a couple of triggers here, and I'm going to say that I'm doing quarterly VAT returns for this client. So I have to give the first date, and I'm somewhat deliberately going to backdate this slightly to say that the 30th of November is the first VAT return that I'm doing for Arsenal Limited. Probably a realistic scenario, that would be due in 7th of Jan, and here we are mid-December. I'll hit save. Now, what you'll see to the right of my date is that the system is saying that this job's going to be created on the 29th of November. So that's the job date minus 1 day. You can configure your own offset, as we call it. Often, for example, on accounts, people will have accounts jobs creating maybe 2 months prior to the year end in order to do a pre-year end phone call or pre-year end tax planning. Payroll, of course, another system where it's important to create the job ahead of the pay date so you can actually remember to pay people. Here I'm just on minus 1 day. Now, the reason I chose November is I wanted to create a scenario where this auto creation date, 29th of November, is clearly in the past. You might not be able to see on my screen capture here, but today is the 13th of December. In this situation, I need to hit Create Now, just to create the first job. What that does is it puts the job, the 30 November job, in the system. It rolls on the trigger date by whatever the frequency is, so this is rolled on to 28 Feb 2017. And now, of course, this next job will create on the 27th of Feb. That date's in the future, so jobs are going to create now automatically. I do not need to be concerned with creating any jobs. It does not matter if I click on this job, if I start it, if I finish it. It's in no way, progress of this existing job is in no way linked to whether the next one is created or not. If you were to close the glide system and come back in 2 years, this client would have 8 more quarterly VAT return jobs. Of course, when a job creates, any statutory deadlines also create. So that's really important. If you imagine you've added a new client, 2 things you need to do really. One, you need to set the green or red system active or not active. Do you provide the service or do you not? And then you need to provide the date of the first workflow. Now, it's a subtle, these accounts, VAT returns, annual returns, management accounts, payroll, engagement letters, they're all examples on my templates of trigger date workflow systems, and they all operate in the way that we've looked at for VAT here. The accounts is subtly different. You'll see that it appears ever so slightly different, and that's because this workflow system has a link to Company's House. When you add a new client, it will be set to active, and the system will go to Company's House. It will work out the first workflow you need to do based on which accounts are due in next, and it will create that job, and it will do that all for you. So subtly different there. But the main difference is with a couple of these systems, tax returns, P11Ds. These are configured to be tax year workflow systems. Now, with the example of P11D, if I set this to active, you'll see that the difference is there is no field for me to enter a date, and that's because in the configuration I have told the system that this workflow system for all clients, the year end is the 5th of April. So what I do instead is I simply configure an auto creation date that applies to the whole system. So I have rather unimaginatively gone for the 6th of April. So on the 6th of April each year, every single client that is active for P11D, i.e. where the tab is green, you can review that by clicking on Our Practice and Services Report. You can get a report of all clients that are active. They're all going to get a new job. Same concept applies in year 1. So for example, sat here in the middle of December, I'm beyond my auto creation date. So in year 1, if I wish to have a job, I will create that job manually. Going forward, that will be created for me. The final type of workflow system is those systems that have neither green nor red colouring. These are the manual initiation systems. People use these systems for things like, as he says, ad hoc projects that I've got here, perhaps new client onboarding. We often see people setting up systems for VAT registrations, payroll setups, anything where you need a workflow, there's a proper process to be followed, but there is no predictability to when a job is needed, and there is no recurring nature to the job. Okay, now picking on one of these tabs, let's go for VAT returns. I'm just going to show you what each of these components means. Well, you can configure as many trigger fields as you like, and each of those can have its own frequency. Payroll is a good example actually, because here you have multiple frequencies, and each client may have more than one frequency active. That's absolutely fine. You can create jobs on both, let's say, a weekly and a monthly basis. Now, if you have below the trigger dates, you've got whether it's active or not. Now, sometimes that'll be the only setting to appear on this line. However, if you have more than one workflow route, you'll also be asked which route this client should default to. I have routes called standard and extra stage. You can create as many variations of your workflow route as you require by going config, edit workflow systems, and perhaps finding an appropriate video to learn how to do that. If you change the route setting, that will be relevant for all future job creation. It won't automatically change existing jobs. Coming down a bit further, you have the system info fields. These are more custom client fields. It just allows you to spread your practice data fields over perhaps more screens than just having them all on this summary tab. For every single one of your workflow screens, you can configure further fields. All of those fields will be available on the Excel import tool if you wish to import the information in bulk. Finally, I should say to configure these fields, it's config and edit workflow systems, drill into the appropriate system, and then it's workflow elements at the very top of that tab. Finally, you've got a list of jobs. You'll see active jobs, you can view the job, and if there were any, you'd also see an area for completed jobs. Now we have the comments board. Okay, so every client card has its own dedicated comments board or discussion area. Every job card has its own one too, so perhaps the client one should be retained for permanent notes. You can either make a comment, or if you click on private, as it says here, your comments will only be visible to yourself. General comments are visible to everyone, and people can reply and make conversation. Anyone linked to the client, that is, anyone fulfilling a staff position anywhere on this client, will get a notification if you make a comment on the client. Finally, let's look at the client options. I can create a task linked to the client. We saw in the task tab a couple of those earlier. I have the zero integration active, and I have the glide time active, so I've got a couple of zero options there. I can change the client's status. I can have prospect, active, lost, and deleted. I have the integration icon. That's because I'm using a connector to a practice management system, and that is showing this is an integrated client. And as I mentioned, I have the zero integration active, so that's also showing that this client is linked to zero. That's a really brief introduction to the client screen, and we'll do some more detailed videos looking at those configuration aspects.